They sold this as a quiet mother and daughter drama. It is one of the ugliest stories Stephen King ever wrote about marriage, and there is nothing supernatural in it at all. Dolores Claiborne, 1995. A drunk husband, a hole in the ground, and an entire town that preferred not to know. The studio pushed it out with almost no promotion. Half the world stripped her name off the poster. The book was branded unfilmable. The main island never existed, and the one impossible thing King hid inside the story got quietly cut before release. 15 weird facts, counting down. Number 15. The book they called unfilmable. Every studio wanted this one. Almost nobody could work out how to shoot it. Stephen King published Dolores Claiborne in 1992, and he broke his own rules doing it. No chapters, no breaks, no second narrator. It is one woman talking, start to finish, in her own rough island accent, confessing to police in a single unbroken run. On the page it is hypnotic. On a soundstage it is a problem. You cannot point a camera at 300 pages of a woman in a chair and call that a movie. The job landed with Tony Gilroy, years before Michael Clayton, before the Bourne films, before Andor. Gilroy did something bold. He kept Dolores's voice, then built a present-day crime story around it. He turned the daughter, Selena, into a second lead with her own damage. He gave Detective Mackey a grudge and a clock. Then he chopped the confession into flashbacks that cut hard against the investigation. Here's the crazy part. The book that supposedly could not be filmed became one of the most respected King adaptations of the 90s, and the writer who cracked it went on to build entire spy franchises on the same trick, keep the secret moving, and let the past bleed into the present until it hurts. The novel was one voice in a dark room. The film turned that voice into a manhunt. Number 14. King wrote it for the woman from Misery some actors audition. Kathy Bates got a novel written around her. In 1990, Bates played Annie Wilkes in Misery and won the Academy Award for it. King was reportedly so taken with what she did to his most frightening character that he wrote the title role of Dolores Claiborne with her in mind, a detail repeated for decades in trivia and retrospectives on the film. He went further, too. When Bates wandered into the 1994 miniseries of The Stand, a male character was reworked as a woman, Ray Flowers, so she could play it. So the casting was almost preloaded, and then it got heavier. Because this was not a fan with a sledgehammer. This was a working-class housekeeper suspected of 2 deaths decades apart who has to sit under a lamp and tell the truth about her marriage. Think about the strange loop there. The same author who wrote the woman who tortured a writer wrote the woman who is tortured by everybody else, and handed both to the same actress. One made audiences scream, the other made them go silent. In Misery, she was the monster. Here the monster was already in the house, and it was the husband. Number 13. 2 film stocks, 2 different world's most movies. Pick a look. This one ran 2 on purpose in the same picture. Director Taylor Hackford has explained the trick himself. For everything set in the present, he and cinematographer Gabriel Beristain shot on Kodak, then stripped it down hard, desaturated it, flashed it, drained the warmth until the island looks like cold iron. For the flashbacks, back when Dolores was young and still hopeful, they switched to Fuji, which gave a soft pastel glow, almost a false memory of happiness. His reference point was not another thriller. Hackford has said he loved the look Sven Nykvist got for Ingmar Bergman on The Passion of Anna, where nearly all the color has been pulled out, and he told Beristain he wanted that for Dolores Claiborne. Here's the twist. Because the past looks warmer and prettier than the present, the film quietly lies to you. Your eye wants to trust those sunlit 1960s scenes, but the sunlight is where the abuse lives, where the money gets stolen, where a girl stops eating and stops talking. The ugly cold present is where the truth finally gets said out loud. Most films use warm light for comfort. This one used it as bait. Number 12. A surrealist painting in the bathroom mirror there is one shot in this film that has no monster in it and still makes people sit up. Selena stands at a mirror. She looks into it, and what looks back is the back of her own head. It plays for a couple of seconds, and it lands like a cold hand on the neck. That is not a random flourish. Hackford has said that he and production designer Bruno Rubio studied the surrealist paintings of René Magritte and folded that imagery straight into the movie. The mirror gag is lifted from Magrette's La Reproduction Interdite, the painting of a man facing a mirror that refuses to show his face. And it is not decoration either. Selena has spent her adult life not looking at what happened to her as a child. She drinks, she smokes, she talks fast and stays busy. Then, the film hands her a mirror that will not give her a face. Remember, this is a King adaptation, with no ghost, no vampire, no clown. So the crew smuggled the horror in through art history instead. No makeup effect in the movie is half as unsettling as a woman seeing the wrong side of her own skull. Number 11. 2 hours in the chair. Every day before the cameras rolled, the star had to be taken apart and rebuilt. Bates is on screen as Dolores across roughly 3 decades. Young wife. Beaten wife. Then, the gray, hollowed-out woman standing over a body at the top of a staircase with a rolling pin in her hand. There is no other actress swapped in for the older version. It is Bates all the way through, aging forward and backward depending on the shooting schedule. A newspaper profile published around the film's release in March 1995 put a number on it, applying Kathy Bates's makeup for Dolores Claiborne took 2 hours a day. That is the part people forget about a performance like this. Before she could play a woman who has been ground down by work, weather, and fear, she sat still while someone painted the grinding on. 2 hours of that, then straight into scenes about a husband's hands, a stolen college fund, and a hole in the ground. And here's the payoff. Almost nobody watching thinks about makeup at all, because the aging never becomes a costume. It reads as time. The glamour ended in the trailer. The work started when the mirror was covered up. Number 10. The stage actress who stole the film an Oscar winner leads this movie. She gets overshadowed by a woman who spends most of her scenes in bed. Vera Donovan is played by Judy Parfitt, an English actress with a long theater career who was largely a stranger to American film audiences in 1995. She plays a rich, cruel, sharp-tongued invalid on a Maine island, and she gets the lines people still quote, including the one about how sometimes being a hard woman is all a woman has to hold on to, and the chilling little offer that an accident can be an unhappy woman's best friend. One widely repeated account of her casting says that after Parfitt read opposite Bates, Bates turned to Hackford and gasped, "Who was that?" and the part was hers. Treat that one as a good story rather than gospel. It circulates as reported anecdote, not documented record. What is not in doubt is the effect. Vera should be the villain. Instead, she becomes the only person on that island who tells Dolores the truth about her own life, and she does it while dying by inches in a bed she cannot leave. 2 women, 1 bed, 1 staircase. And the cruelest character in the film turns out to be the closest thing Dolores has to a friend. Number 9. A teenager had to carry the ugliest scenes. The hardest role in this film was not the murder suspect. It was the child. Young Selena is played by Ellen Muth, and Dolores Claiborne was her screen debut. The material she was handed is as dark as mainstream 1990s drama got. A father who grooms his own daughter, a girl who stops eating, stops washing, stops speaking, and a mother who works out what is happening a beat too late. Muth had to build all of that without a single line of explanation. The film never spells the abuse out in speeches. It lives in erect posture, a flinch, a locket that should not be there. The industry noticed. Muth shared a Best Supporting Actress prize at the Tokyo International Film Festival in 1995 for that debut. Years later, she became a cult favorite as the reluctant Grim Reaper in Dead Like Me, and in a 2015 interview she said she had hit the pause button on acting. Most teen debuts are a first kiss and a school corridor. Hers was the darkest room in a Stephen King story, and she never once oversold it. Number 8. They hired a monster composer with no monster castle rock, brought in the man who scored Batman and Beetlejuice for a film about a beaten wife. The composer is Danny Elfman. By 1995, his name meant Gothic circus music. Tim Burton. Gargoyles, The Nightmare Before Christmas. Dolores Claiborne has none of that. No creature. No haunted hotel. The threats are a bottle of scotch, a locked bank account, and a man who knows nobody in town will believe his wife. So Elfman scored the dread instead of the monster. Reviewers at the time and since have called the music spooky and somber rather than dramatic, a low, patient unease sitting under kitchen tables and fairy rides. Here's the crazy part. Because the score behaves like horror music, your body treats ordinary domestic scenes as horror scenes. A man walking into his own house lands like a creature entering a frame. That is a nasty, brilliant piece of manipulation, and it is doing more work than most of the dialogue. Roger Ebert put his finger on why it works. He wrote that this is a horror story, just not a supernatural one built out of everyday horrors like alcoholism, wife-beating, child abuse, and pride. The scariest sound in the movie is not a scream, it is a screen door. Number 7. Maine was a lie, little tall island. Maine does not exist. Neither did most of what you see. The film was shot in Nova Scotia, Canada, Lunenburg, Mahone Bay, Chester, Stonehurst, and Digby, standing in for King's fictional island. The town squares, the harbor, the salt-bitten houses on the rocks, that is Canadian coastline, wearing an American accent. The St. George house is the strangest part. It was not a found location. It was built. Exteriors were done at Blue Rocks, just outside Lunenburg, on an open, unspoiled stretch of shoreline, and the house was custom-made and artificially aged so it would read as a broken-down home somebody had been unhappy in for 20 years. One crew account of the build adds a detail that tells you everything about how films cheat. The set went up in components, and the roof and front porch were made wild, meaning they could be pulled off so cameras and lights could get inside. So the most claustrophobic house in the movie was a shell with removable walls on a beach in another country. Audiences came out talking about how real that awful little house felt. There was never a house there at all. Number 6. The murder is timed to a real eclipse. The darkest scene in the film is built on real astronomy. In King's story, the death of Joe St. George happens under a total solar eclipse, and that eclipse was not invented. On July 20th, 1963, a genuine total solar eclipse crossed northern New England, Maine included. Whole towns went outside with smoked glass and cardboard viewers to watch daylight vanish. King took that real afternoon and used it twice. He built both Dolores Claiborne and its companion novel Gerald's Game around the same eclipse, and both books were printed with a map of the eclipse path in their front pages. Here's what makes it so cold. An eclipse is a public event. Everyone on the island is on the shore, looking up, in fancy hats, drinking punch. Nobody is looking at a woman walking her drunk husband home. The whole town's attention is the murder weapon. That is the buried truth of that sequence, and it is the reason it plays as horror rather than crime. The sky did the alibi. All Dolores had to do was choose the day. Everyone remembers where they were during the eclipse. That was exactly the point. Number 5. The ghost thread that cut out the film removes the one openly supernatural thing King wrote into the book, and almost nobody notices. In the novel, during that eclipse, Dolores has flashes of a young girl somewhere else, a child being abused by her own father in the same darkness. That girl is Jessie Burlingame, from Gerald's Game. 2 women, 2 separate books, 1 eclipse, 1 moment of psychic contact. In a story with no ghosts, that link is the only clearly impossible event on the page. Tony Gilroy's screenplay drops it. On screen, the eclipse stays surreal, but it stays inside Dolores' own head and her own crime. No telepathy, no crossover. And then the wheel turned. When Mike Flanagan adapted Gerald's Game for Netflix in 2017, that film kept the connection alive from its side of the story. The same eclipse, the same buried link between 2 victims separated by miles. Here's the twist. Cutting the supernatural made Dolores Claiborne worse to watch, not weaker. Once you remove the psychic escape hatch, there is nothing mystical to blame. Just a man, a bottle, a daughter, and a mother making a decision. King gave the story one supernatural rescue. The movie took it away and left her alone with it. Number 4. The sky they got wrong. For a film obsessed with the sky, there is one detail in it that cannot happen. Dolores Claiborne builds toward a total solar eclipse. A solar eclipse requires a new moon, the moon sitting between us and the sun, its lit face turned away, effectively invisible from the ground. That is not a rule of thumb. It is the mechanism. And yet, in a scene the night before the eclipse, the film shows a full moon hanging over the road. Continuity trackers have flagged it for years, because a full moon cannot occur hours before a total solar eclipse. The moon would have to be on both sides of the Earth at once. It is a tiny thing, and it survives because the film has already hypnotized you. You are watching a woman drive home with a plan in her head. Nobody in the audience is auditing lunar phases. Still, there is something almost funny about it. A production that dismantled a house and swallowed an enormous soundstage to fake the daylight going out could not resist a pretty moon in the wrong phase. The crew nailed the physics of darkness. They just got the moon backwards on the way there. Number 3. A small, quiet release that beat the odds. This film went out cheap, without much of a marketing push, and it still tripled its money. Dolores Claiborne opened in the United States on March 24, 1995, made for around $13 million, with little promotion behind it. That is not how a studio behaves when it thinks it has a hit. That is how a studio behaves when it has a bleak 2-hour drama about domestic abuse with a Stephen King name on the poster and no clear way to sell either half. It opened with under $6 million domestically. Then it kept walking. Final worldwide take, roughly $46.4 million off a $13 million budget, a genuine sleeper hit. Here's the part that stings. Compared with the King boom happening around it, this was treated as a minor title, and for years it sat in the shadow of louder adaptations. Then Time magazine listed it among the 10 best Stephen King film adaptations in 2013, and critics kept circling back to it as one of the most overlooked things his work produced. The studio bet small on a story about a woman nobody believed, which honestly is the most on-theme thing about the entire release. Number 2. Foreign posters erased her name. The film is named after her. In several countries, they took her name off it. Release records show what happened around the world. In Latin America and Brazil, it went out as Total Eclipse. Spain used Total Eclipse with the character's name shoved into brackets. Italy renamed it The Last Eclipse. Greece released it as Total Eclipse as well. In Germany, it was cut down to just Dolores, and sometimes to Stephen King's Dolores, the author's name promoted above the woman's own story. Japan went in the other direction entirely. There the film was released under a title that means silence. In the legal sense of refusing to speak, the word for keeping your mouth shut under questioning. Think about what those choices say. Distributors looked at a 2-hour film about a working-class woman finally telling the truth and decided the sellable part was an astronomical event, or a brand name, or her refusal to talk. The whole story is about a woman insisting on being heard, in her own words, using her own name. Half the world's marketing departments looked at that and reached for the eclipse instead. Number 1. They rebuilt the house inside a hockey arena. There is no computer trick in the eclipse. There is a demolished house and an ice rink. This was 1995. Digital work existed, but it was expensive, primitive, and mostly useless for a 2.5-minute sequence that had to feel like real daylight dying over a real harbor. Hackford's team went the other way. Practical, enormous, insane. Accounts of the production describe how the St. George house, built for real out on the rocks at Blue Rocks, was disassembled and then reassembled indoors, standing in front of what was described as the largest blue-screen soundstage then in existence. A stage constructed inside a hockey arena so the sky behind the house could be controlled, blackened, and lit to order. So the crew tore down the house they had just built, trucked it into a rink, put it back together, and stood a false ocean behind it. And the result is the strangest-looking passage in any King film of that era. The harbor looks like a painted diorama. The light turns metallic. Reality goes slightly wrong. Right at the moment, a woman lets her husband walk toward a well. They emptied a hockey arena and killed the sun in it. Also, one murder would look like a dream. Bonus fact: the story that refused to stay buried most 90s dramas and at home video. This one kept getting resurrected in rooms nobody expected. In 2007, Dolores Claiborne was adapted for the stage. Then, in 2013, San Francisco Opera premiered it as a full 2-act opera. A story about a housekeeper, a rolling pin and a well, sung in an opera house. That is a very strange afterlife for a book written as one woman's police statement. The critical reputation kept climbing, too. Time put the film on its list of the 10 best King adaptations in 2013. Reviewers who had filed it away as a modest thriller started calling it one of the most underrated things ever pulled from his work. And there is one last detail that reframes the whole shoot. 2 hours of makeup a day, an unfilmable book, a house torn down and rebuilt indoors, weeks inside the worst marriage King ever wrote. and Kathy Bates has said in a retrospective interview that Dolores is her favorite performance she has ever given. Not the Oscar. Not the sledgehammer. This one. The world remembers her as Annie Wilkes. She picked the housekeeper nobody believed. That is the shape of Dolores Claiborne. A film with no ghost that behaves like a haunting. A production that built a home just to take it apart. A story where the town's biggest public event is exactly what makes a private killing possible, and where the only supernatural thread King wrote got quietly cut on the way to the screen. The released film is not the whole story. There is a version in the novel with a psychic link to another woman in another book. There is a version in Nova Scotia with removable walls and a fake harbor. And there is a version in half the world's cinemas where her name did not even make the poster. So which one got you? The house inside the hockey arena? The eclipse used as an alibi? Or the titles that erased her? Tell me in the comments. If you like buried production truth like this, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The next file is already open.